So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins. But then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama with Karl Rove, or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion, and desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out, back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and this, and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just, recently. And Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, oh, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? I mean, remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women at parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you get the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. I mean, it's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt, sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court of the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the hour, the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And you know, it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. A couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, I mean, this is a fundamental question, do we want to have in the United States media available to us that goes beyond the conventional wisdom line, that goes beyond the corporate line, that goes beyond the acceptable, in quotes, line, and actually expands the story a little bit, gives more depth and more detail? It's not just, you know, all sports all the time. Who's ahead, who's behind? Call 877-378-8669 now. Thank you.
Want to connect with us? This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, are you ready for war? Donald Trump and Mike Pence apparently are. Pence gave a speech this morning talking about how we are locked and loaded. I guess Trump has updated. Last time around when Trump was tweeting about this, it was that he was cocked and loaded. Now he's locked and loaded. he's figuring out the rhetoric. But I think it's, there's a bunch of kind of issues that are pulling together here at the same time. The first is that the Constitution does not give the President of the United States the right to declare war. And the framers of the Constitution were very, very clear about that. That declaring war was a kingly power, and they never wanted a president of the United States to have that power. They did not want the guy who was in charge of the military to be able to make a decision about whether or not to use the military. They had seen example after example after example in 1,000 years of European history, where the guy who ran the military was also the king, was also the guy who made decisions about using the military, and made those decisions stupidly, inappropriately, in ways that would, aggrandize or improve the wealth of himself, things like this. And they said, just no, ain't gonna happen. So, Article 1 of the Constitution is quite clear, quite explicit, that only Congress can make war. Only Congress can make those decisions. That's it. Only Congress. And yet, you've got Donald Trump talking like, yeah, maybe we'll go to war. I mean, this should really concern us. And he's not just saying maybe we'll go to war. He's saying, well, we're waiting to hear from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we would proceed. We? This is on Monday. Trump says, this was during a press gaggle in the Oval Office, Saudi Arabia pays cash. We would certainly help them. They've been a great ally. They spent $400 billion in our country over the last number of years. $400 billion. That's 1.5 million jobs. Well, first of all, they didn't spend $400 billion. And secondly, so what? We do not have a mutual defense treaty with with Saudi Arabia. I mean, we do with Europe. That's what NATO is. NATO is a massive mutual defense. If one of us is attacked, all of us are attacked, and we respond. It's one of the reasons why Russia is so freaked out about NATO countries being on its border. These are absolute mutual defense treaties, but we don't have a treaty like that with Saudi Arabia. There's people who are saying that this attack on Saudi oil fields is Saudi Arabia's 9/11, which is kind of rich, given that I believe it was 17 of the 19 hijackers who attacked us on 9/11 were Saudis. But Donald Trump goes on and he says, after he says, we would certainly help them. They spend $400 billion in our countries. That's 1.5 million jobs. And then he goes on, which again, like I said, it's not true, but nonetheless, he's massively overstating how much money Saudi Arabia spends here. But then he goes on to say, this is something that's much different than other presidents would mention. Gee, you think? Like other presidents who actually took civics in high school, who understand that there's 3 branches of government, who understand how war goes and all these kind of things. He says, nonetheless, the Saudis would be very much involved, and that includes payment. So Trump wants to rent out our military. I mean, if the Saudis want to hire a military, they should talk to Eric Prince. And they may well be doing so. But talking to the President of the United States? No, I don't think so. By the way, because of fracking, by and large, the United States, we had this massive boom in fossil fuels. So much so that up to a couple of years ago, it was against the law for any company in the United States to export crude oil. You could export refined oil. You could export gasoline or diesel fuel or jet fuel or stuff like that, chemicals. But you could not export raw oil. Why? Because we'd always been an importer of oil. It's why the Arab oil embargo, both of them in the early 70s, early and mid 70s, so damaged our economy. We had 16% inflation because of that. Because when the oil was cut off, the price of oil just exploded because we couldn't produce enough oil here in the United States. So now we're, largely because of fracking, which I'm not real happy about, but this is the simple reality of the situation. We are not only producing enough oil to meet all our needs, we're now exporting oil. I believe it was in the first year of the Trump administration. I think it was about 2 years ago. Congress actually changed the law. This is when the Republicans control both the House and Senate and said, yeah, sure, these big oil companies in the United States that are pumping oil, they can export it. Make your money. Knock yourself out. So who buys Saudi Arabia's oil if we're not? I mean, we still are actually still buying some Saudi oil. But we don't need to, number one. Number two, who actually is buying the majority of Saudi oil? China, South Korea, and India. Japan is also a big purchaser. But most of it's going to China and India. Now, China and India are big countries. They have big militaries. China's is the fastest growing military in the world right now. If Saudi Arabia wants somebody to participate with them in a war on Iran, let them talk to China. This is not our fight. Saudi Arabia they are not our friends. They don't share our values. I mean, they have crucified or beheaded over 100 people this year, including people who were arrested as children. They hang women from the ceiling of jail cells if they speak up against the oppression of women in Saudi Arabia. These feminist activists. The rights of women in Saudi Arabia are massively truncated. They're beheading people for pot. I mean, it's Osama bin Laden said that the reason he was going to attack America, this was 2 years before, this was in 1998 or 1999. New York Times reported on this, that Osama bin Laden had said that he was thinking of attacking the United States because the U.S. had an air base in Saudi Arabia. This is the legacy of Elder Bush's war. Elder Bush wanted to have a war in order to get himself reelected. He became president in 1980, the election of 88. He became president in 89 when Reagan faded into Alzheimer's. But then he was up for re-election in 92, and he thought, hey, you know, I'll have a little war. War is always a good thing. And in order to have his little war in Iraq, and you know this whole thing was kind of set up, right? The April Gillespie, I think her name was, the person in the State Department that Saddam Hussein came to and said, you know, hey, they are slant drilling. The Kuwaitis are slant drilling underneath my country and stealing my oil, and I would like to attack them for that. I would like to reclaim them. After all, Kuwait used to be part of Iraq. Used to be like the 54th district or something like that. And April Gillespie was like, well, you know, it's not our issue. And Saddam Hussein thought that was a green light, and boom, in he goes. And George Herbert Walker Bush says, oh boy, here's my little war. This will get me reelected. But in order to have that war, he had to have an Air Force base in Saudi Arabia that he could stage, you know, from which planes could fly and bomb the bejesus out of Baghdad. So they built an Air Force base. This Air Force base is why Osama bin Laden told us he was going to attack us. Because it was on the holy soil of Saudi Arabia. There were men watching pornography and drinking alcohol and listening to music. There were women who were showing their elbows and driving cars. And so he was going to attack the United States. I don't think most Americans know why bin Laden attacked the United States, but he told us in advance. And he was a Saudi. And he was an adherent of Saudi Wahhabism, of the Wahhabi sect of Sunni Islam, which Saudi Arabia to this day is promoting all over the world, which is which contains the religious and philosophical underpinnings of both Al Qaeda and ISIS. These are Sunni Wahhabist movements, or have derived from them. So here we have a country with whom we have no mutual defense treaty, Saudi Arabia, whose people participated in a massive attack on the United States. And in response to that, we did not attack Saudi Arabia. We attacked Afghanistan and Iraq, which had nothing to do with this, which, you know, turned Dick Cheney into a multi-millionaire. And I'm sure helped out George W. Bush and his family, too. And got George W. Bush reelected, which was his whole point that he told Mickey Herskowitz just before the election. But anyhow, here we have this situation where this country that we have no mutual defense treaty with may well be telling Donald Trump, he says, you know, we're going to wait to hear from Saudi Arabia what we should do. So this brutal prince who executes people arrested as children and dissidents and beheads them or crucifies them is going to tell us. Now, our Constitution says Congress tells us when we go to war and to whom we go to war against. But I think it's really important that right now we all be calling our members of Congress at 202-225-3121. You have 2 senators and 1 member of the House of Representatives, you know, unless you live in D.C. or Puerto Rico, but you get the point. Call now and say, no, we don't want another war. What are your thoughts on this? How we should be responding to this? What we should do? And let me also give you some history on the Yemen conflict.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll dig into the war that Saudi Arabia is fighting right now in Yemen, which is what provoked this attack on Saudi Arabia after the break. It's 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I am just disgusted with this whole Saudi Arabia situation.
But they spend tens of millions of dollars buying Donald Trump's condos, and they rented an entire floor of his hotel in D.C. last year.
This whole situation is really revealing the capitalist class in America and their true interest, which is money, 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 money. Trump is kind of like the personification of all this greed and corruption and just general, basically evilness. He's got that evil vibe to him. Him and the Saudi royal family in general. There's just something pure evil about this regime in power, and I feel like calling Congress is pointless at this point because they're the ones funding these wars. You had Congress just vote like a couple weeks ago to vote in a $1 trillion military budget. Almost all the Democrats voted for it. AOC, by the way, voted for it. And it's like, because it was part of, it also went to discretionary spending. So it's like, no matter what we do, we got Congress, which isn't taking responsibility for these wars, even though the Constitution says that. You have a president who can take us to war whenever they feel like it. And you have a public that's just like so burnt out because we feel like we're just spectators on the side, and our opinions don't matter at all because we have this deep state that's running everything since basically Truman set up the national security state during the Cold War.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd use the phrase deep state because that just plays into the paranoid fantasies of, Fox watchers and Trumpies. But the simple reality is that it's not so much the deep state, Jared. It's the defense industry. You've got an industry that spends hundreds of millions of dollars a year bribing members of Congress. And the consequence of that bribery are these massive military budgets and these absolutely unnecessary wars that administration after administration jumps into enthusiastically.
It's a military dictatorship. It's a military dictatorship by a different name and a different form.
No, it's a corporate dictatorship.
Corporate military industrial.
Well, the fact that these corporations are making stuff for the military is why we have the military piece of this. But and
most of it isn't going to the soldiers. Most of this isn't going to the soldiers or the VA. You don't see any of this going to any of these bases or anything like that.
No. In fact, what little money there is for the soldiers and for the bases and for the schools, for the kids of soldiers and things like that is being rerouted to Donald Trump's vanity wall.
It's
pretty grim.
Completely crazy.
It's pretty grim. Jared, thanks for the call. We'll be back in just a minute. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We're going to get into what's going on in Yemen. Stick around. So Yemen's conflict, nearly 10, well, actually, I would say probably at least 10,000 human beings are dead right now as a consequence of the civil war in Yemen and Saudi Arabia's involvement in it. And millions of people right now are on the brink of starvation. The largest cholera epidemic, the largest cholera outbreak in the world is happening right now in Yemen. The Saudis, the aid agencies are trying to get food into Yemen, and the Saudis are bombing the ports that you bring food into. So all of this really started back in 2011 with the Arab Spring, when all these farmers were pushed off their land in the northern parts of Saudi Arabia, of Sudan, of Libya, right across the region, essentially. Farmers pushed off their land, and as a result, A, you've got more homeless people in the cities, and B, the price of wheat goes up. The price of wheat goes up. Kid lights himself on fire in Tunisia, and we're off to the races. So as the Arab Spring spread across northern Africa, and the Obama administration was encouraging this, and I don't mean that as a knock on them. We thought at the time, this is a good thing. This is a movement toward democracy. That's what it looked like. It's not how it turned out, but that's what it looked like. What it actually was climate refugees. And we failed to recognize it for what it was. But anyhow, the president of Yemen was a guy named Ali Abdullah Saleh, S-A-L-E-H. And when the Arab Spring happened in Yemen, and the people rose up and said, this guy's corrupt, he needs to leave, he said, okay, cool, I'm out of here. And he handed the reins of government over to his number 2 guy, whose name was Abdullah Mansour Hadi. So Saleh turns power over to Hadi. Now, Hadi was supposed to be a good guy who was going to make Yemen, a nice, stable country. But he couldn't do it. I mean, the corruption was insane. Yemen was suffering from the same climate refugee problem that Syria was, and Libya was, and Tunisia was. There's food insecurity. And then on top of that, you had a bunch of military officers who were actually loyal to Saleh, the president who had to leave. I mean, part of his corruption was paying off his own military. So in 2014, some Shia Muslim Houthis said, enough of this stuff. And they rose up. They said, we don't like the number 2 guy either. It was kind of an extension of the Arab Spring. We don't like Mr. Hadi. And they literally captured the capital, Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, which they still hold, by the way. And Mr. Hadi had to flee. He's outside the country. And so Saudi Arabia then says, oh, well, we can't have this. Yemen is going to end up under the control of Shia Muslims. And so they start bombing the crap out of Yemen, saying, we're going to bomb you Houthis, you rebels, until you surrender. Well, the Houthis haven't surrendered. 22.5 million people, 3/4 of the population right now, are at risk of starvation in Yemen. 400,000 children under the age of 5 on the verge of death. And Saudi Arabia is continuing to bomb the crap out of them. They fight back, and we're supposed to declare war?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I would like to solicit your opinions on this. We'll talk about it right after the break. It's 28 minutes past the hour. Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins, but then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama with Karl Rove and or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion. And desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just recently, and Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? Remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women in parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you get the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. It's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt, sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. A couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, this is a fundamental question, do we want to have in the United States media available to us that goes beyond the conventional wisdom line, that goes beyond the corporate line, that goes beyond the acceptable, in quotes, news line, and actually expands the story a little bit, gives more depth and more detail? It's not just, all sports all the time. Who's ahead, who's behind? Call 877-378-8669 now. Thanks.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, by the way, I went off on a rant at some length yesterday, I believe. Yeah, it was yesterday, about how, everybody's saying, oh, Felicity Huffman, $15,000 bribe to get her kid in college is terrible. And I pointed out that literally millions of dollars an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 weeks a year are being spent as bribes by billionaires and corporations to buy our political process at both the federal and state level. The article that expands on that and gives all the, not all, but many of the examples is now up. It's over at Raw Story, it's on Alternet, and it's on Common Dreams. So, your choice of your favorite place to find those kind of things. But all of this reminds me, and I'm going to pick up your calls in just a moment, but all of this reminds me of a warning that I wrote about at some length back in my book Screwed, which I think it was, back in 2008 or something like that, which was, the war against the American middle class. And in that book, I went back to kind of the beginning, the beginning of this idea of representative democracy. And quoting from Thomas Jefferson, who was writing about how in history, the three types of people who ruled nations came from the people who ruled nations came from one of three basic categories of people, and they collaborated always, these three categories of people, to create these dictatorships, essentially, these kingdoms. And those were theocrats, people who ruled because they said God gave them permission and told them that they should. Warlords, people who ruled because they were the most brutal, the most willing to use violence. And the very rich, the very wealthy. These were the three tyrannies that Jefferson identified in his early writings. And they're back. In fact, I would say that Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, encompasses literally all three of those. And then, of course, we have, this is coming out of my computer, Sean, then, of course, we have Donald Trump talking about Saudi Arabia on the campaign trail. This was, back a while ago, before he was elected. Here he is.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me, they spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia, I get along fine with them. They buy apartments from me, $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? Let us not forget. Jesse in Seattle. Hey, Jesse, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for having me on.
Sure.
I know the topic is Saudi Arabia, and I thought, when we're talking about Saudi Arabia's crimes against the United States, bears mentioning murdering the American Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Yeah. And if you recall, Trump excused Mr. Bonesaw's MBS assassination of our American resident by saying that MBS was a great ally and suggesting that he was innocent of ordering the assassination. I think
because he said he was.
Yeah, because he said he was, exactly. Yeah. And then Trump also, just looking through recent articles, found that Trump has also refused to comply with the Magnitsky Act's requirements that the administration present its findings on the Khashoggi case to Congress. So it should never be forgotten that Trump is, again, violating the law and continues to erode our moral standing in the world.
Right, and running a cover-up. It's crazy. Excellent point. Thank you very much, Jesse. Nick in Hemet, California, listening on KPFK. What's up, Nick? It says here you disagree with me.
Yeah, well, what sent me off, man, was you started talking about the women with their elbows out of the windows of the cars, and I went, oh man, look, here's Tom making judgments on. No,
this was Osama bin Laden. He said it. He came right out and said it. He said these people are committing blasphemy on Saudi soil.
Well, I mean,
It is a violation of the precepts of Islam, and Saudi Arabia is the holy keeper of Sunni Islam. It's a violation of that for women to show their elbows.
All right, so what? That's their business.
Well,
it's not our business. Look
no,
at
it became
America,
our
man.
business when he
What's
attacked
going
us on 9/11
Everybody's
because of that,
trying to-
Nick.
What?
It became our business when bin Laden attacked the United States on 9/11, and he said that he attacked
Who
us.
said he did that?
Read it in the New York Times, Nick. This is not something that's controversial. It's not something that people are debating. It's very straightforward. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I'm listening to this stuff, and it's just angering me so much. They're trying to push this yet into another war, and I have a funny feeling it has to do with him becoming a president again. But what really gets me and gets my dander up is the fact that the American people aren't screaming out. My God, what is it going to take for them to learn what's going on? History shows exactly where we're headed, and they don't want to listen. I'm a veteran. My generation, 58,000 GIs got killed. And, you know, we were in 18 years of war, and I don't know, you take that and divide it by 18 years, you divide that by, you only come up with about maybe a little over 300 soldiers a year getting killed. That's not a good thing, but there are more people killed in Chicago in 1 year than that. And not only that, there are two.
But that has nothing to do with whether we should go to war with Saudi Arabia. You're all over the place here, Donald. What's your point?
Okay, well, my point is this. No, we shouldn't go to war with Saudi Arabia, and things should be said exactly the way you said.
Yeah.
Things should be said exactly the way you said it on television, on all these network channels, and coming out of the mouths of our Democratic Party.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Kathy in Valparaiso, Indiana. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
Well, sorry. What I'm upset about is, and what I can't figure out is why everybody else hasn't mentioned it, that John Bolton resigns a week ago today, and within the last week, Saudi Arabia's oil fields get bombed.
Right.
Doesn't anybody put the connection together? This, it's like, this is ridiculous.
Well, if you want a 2+2 conspiracy theory, here's one for you. I'm not endorsing this conspiracy theory, but it's out there, and in fact, I've seen people talking about it on network television, or at least on cable television, and that is that there are reports out of Saudi Arabia that for some months now, Mohammed bin Salman, Mr. Bonesaw, the guy who runs Saudi Arabia, has been saying out loud that he wants to have an actual war. Like, he's having a war with Yemen right now. He wants to have a real war with Iran. And that he thinks the United States will back him up, and this will make him into a great leader, and he can take down, Shia Islam once and for all, and all this kind of stuff. And, we got lied into a couple of wars, right? The USS Maine led to the Spanish-American War. The Gulf of Tonkin led to the Vietnam War. Neither of those things were actual attacks on the United States. But, false flag operations have a long history of being exploited as reasons to go to war. Hitler did it with the burning of the Reichstag-Gebäude, the Parliament building. So there is a theory out there that Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudis, bombed their own oil facilities, specifically so they could blame it on the Iranians. And then, now, as I said, I'm not endorsing that theory. I think it's pretty thin stuff. But God only knows. I mean, this should not be our fight. To you, Kathy.
Right, but what I'm saying is we should have expected this to happen because of the way John Bolton left and the way Trump acted and reacted to it. I think he was trying to warn everybody, but nobody was paying attention.
You think Bolton was trying to warn us that Trump wanted to have a war with Iran? I thought Bolton wanted to have a war with Iran, and Trump got rid of him because in part he didn't want to have that war, and in part because he discovered that Bolton was the guy who had leaked the story that Trump wanted to nuke the hurricane.
Right. It's just a mess. It's just a big old mess. I go back to when all this started in 2010, 2011 with Syria.
Yeah. I'm with you, Kathy. I'm with you. But okay. Increasingly, the frame, and Kathy, thank you for the call. Increasingly, the frame of the conversation that we're having is that somehow maybe Trump should make the decision to go to war, or maybe Trump shouldn't make the decision to go to war. Is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? That's the wrong frame. The frame should be Congress gets to make the decision to go to war. This isn't even Trump's choice. What the hell's he talking about up there saying, we're waiting for the king to tell us what to do? Really? Congress tells you what to do.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And if you would like to share your thoughts with your member of Congress, 202-225-3121 gets you the congressional switchboard. And welcome back. Ed in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, Ed.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm just addressing the point that you mentioned that we do not have any agreements with Saudi Arabia in terms of some kind of protection.
Mutual defense, yes.
It has to be mentioned that as early as 1932, when we discovered that oil was an important commodity, Saudi Arabia just happened to have an abundance of it. And we couldn't actually see us living in a world where Saudi Arabia is the first or the number one producer of this commodity and us not wanting it and us not protecting it. So as far as you mentioning something about we lack any agreement to protect each other and so forth, of course Saudi Arabia cannot protect us. They can only protect us in one regard, for instance. In 1973, where when we went to war with, when actually the Arabs went to war with the Israelis and so forth, and oil prices had gone up and doubled and tripled to where it had affected the U.S. economy deeply, Saudi Arabia was the only one that was boosting production so they can keep prices low.
Right, to help us out.
In all honesty, in 1991, when we went and helped out the Kuwaitis and so forth against the aggressions of Saddam Hussein, was to protect the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, and the Saudis. There is definitely some kind of a convention between us and them to say, if we are attacked, you're not basically protecting our dictatorships. You are protecting assets that are useful to the Americans.
Right, and this was, but this was a really big issue back when the United States was a net importer of oil. We are now a net exporter of oil. We can afford to say, hey, no problem, guys, go have a war. Fight among yourselves. It's not our battle. I get the history of it, and we have been the ones who have been supporting Wahhabism since the 1920s or 1930s, and that's been the Saudi royal family's thing. They made a deal with the devil, back in the late, I think it was the 1800s, and which brought us Al Qaeda and which brought us ISIS and brought us 9/11 and everything else. But right now, and I'm agreeing with you here on this, Ed. I guess we don't need to be involved in another war. Period. We should not be. Ed, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 47 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We're talking about the possibility that the United States, that U.S. troops, the young men and women from the United States, may end up dying to defend a murderous dictator in Saudi Arabia. Thom Hartmann here with you, 47 minutes past the hour. Not sure where we are in our break sequence, but anyhow, let's see here. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor, we should not forget that 15% of the American economy relates to war materials. So violence is good for our economy. We got a $7 billion military budget, and Congress hasn't declared war on nobody. So, we might want to remember that we're more into monetary capital than we are social capital. That's just our culture, so we should remember that.
Yeah, the last time Congress declared war on anybody was World War II. I mean, that was it. And spot on, Morris. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I find it ironic that the only candidate calling out the racket of war, Tulsi Gabbard, has been blackballed from the DNC debates and attacked by you and Stephanie Miller.
Okay. I'm not sure what I said to attack Tulsi Gabbard, but...
Well, you called her a Russian troll. A Russian bot?
No, I didn't call her a Russian troll.
Yes, you did.
I may well have said that she is. That people are saying that she's a Russian troll. I don't know if she's a Russian troll, and frankly, I don't care. As I said some time ago, when our topic came up, was that I don't think that she's seriously running for president. I think she's running for the United States Senate, or she's trying to cement her seat in Congress. But you're right, Tulsi Gabbard is an outspoken opponent of war, and for that, I salute her. Patrick in Glen Cove, New York. Excuse me, Patrick, you're on the air.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's Long Island. Glen Cove is on Long Island. I had heard something the other day, and I can't recall whether it could have been Randy Rhoads or maybe it was on Stephanie Miller. But anyway, when Bush was pressing for war, little Bush, when he was pressing for war, he had the powers to combat Islamic terrorism given to him. Now, the theory is that that's never been revoked. It still is active.
Right. This is what you're talking about, Patrick, is the authorization to use military force, the AUMF, that was given to George W. Bush right after 9/11, and it explicitly says that he can go after anybody who was involved in or participated or supported the 9/11 attacks. And that has been stretched and stretched and stretched to include country after country after country, including Iraq, which had absolutely nothing to do with anything.
Correct.
And it's time to shut the AUMF down and go back to Congress having to declare war.
I agree with you 100%, and the fear is that Trump will use this as his basis for he's combating terrorism and leave me alone, this has been our problem, and I'm going to solve it and take care of it. And also, it appears as though Pompeo has been a long-time advocate of going after Iran. So I don't think Bolton had anything to do with this. I think it's Pompeo and Trump hatching up their own little nonsense.
Yeah,
which is not nonsense at all.
Yeah, I'm with you. And Congress is the one that should have the power to do or say something about it. Thanks a lot for the call. Mary in Arlington, Texas. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very upset about Cokie Roberts today, but of course, there's something else I want to speak
just
about.
Just for people who don't know what you're talking about, Mary, Cokie Roberts just passed away. She was 75. She's an iconic figure on National Public Radio. Her father was a member of I think he was a senator, member of Congress. And
yes.
Anyhow, back to you, Mary.
Yes, okay. Well, I'm remembering now. I'm older than most of y'all. And I'm remembering that we made a deal with Osama bin Laden to protect him. And then he looked and saw that Kissinger was selling tanks to Russia on the oil line that was going to go all the way to the sea.
Right, you're talking back in the 80s.
Yes, I'm talking way back.
Yeah.
I'm talking
this is when
way
we were
back.
supporting him as part of the Mujahideen who were fighting against the Soviets who were occupying Afghanistan at the time. This was even before the breakup of the Soviet Union, yes.
Yes. Yes.
Bin Laden was our guy. You're absolutely right, Mary.
Well, and of course, I follow the political line pretty much. But he turned on us then because he was so upset with Kissinger.
Yeah, this is the Charlie Wilson's War tells this story.
Yeah, exactly. And people don't realize what's going on.
Yep.
It's been going on for a long time between the Sunnis and the Shiites.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it literally goes back to the Reagan administration. And that's another reason why we should be so disgusted by this. Mary, thank you for the call and for pointing that out. Doug in San Diego. Hey, Doug, you don't think Trump is going to go to war?
No, Trump's not going to war. He campaigned on in 2016, specifically not to go take us into stupid foreign wars. You left out that clip conveniently. You're sort of like the New York wasted time. You kind of leave out, omit facts. So, Trump actually said that he's not going to take us into stupid foreign wars, and he was going to fight for Saudi Arabia.
I know, and I think that a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump did so because he said that. Because there's a broad consensus that these are stupid wars. But the question, Doug, is whether Trump has said a lot of things that we later find out he lied about. I mean, a lot of things. You know, like, you know, this guy's told 12,000 documented lies since he became president. He lies about the friggin' weather, for God's sake. And now he's ginning up intelligence. I mean, this is, you know, Republican presidents love doing this. And some Democratic president, you know, Lyndon Johnson did this with the Gulf of Tonkin. Frankly, I don't want to see this happen. Mark in Mineola, Texas. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the show. I really enjoy it.
Thank you, Mark.
I just had a little personal thing that happened years ago. A gentleman that George Bush was in the Texas Air National Guard. It's all in the book House of Bush, House of Sod. But he arranged for the Bin Ladens to buy a ranch here in Texas that actually adjoined his ranch.
In Crawford?
No, in Liberty County in Texas.
Oh, this was back before he was president. When he was governor?
It was when he was president. He was, you know, they flew him out of there after 9/11. Do you remember when only the Bin Ladens flew out of the country?
Oh, I remember it vividly.
Well, I just had some personal information. It was strange reading that book, and when they mentioned that man's name, I'm like, oh gosh, I know that guy.
Right.
And when we used to go down there, they literally would block off a county road, and we would say, oh, the Arabs are down there. We didn't know it was the Bin Laden family. But after the fact, we find out it's the Bin Laden family. Now, I'm not saying Osama Bin Laden, but Osama Bin Laden's family.
Right.
That they had bought the ranch next to the gentleman who was in the Air National Guard and was a big friend with George Bush.
Oh, okay. And
so it was just a strange thing when you're reading something and you're saying, oh, yeah, I know all about that. You know, it was just, I opened my eyes to this is a fact, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you, Mark, for reminding us all of that.
Thanks for the show. I really enjoy it.
Thanks. I appreciate the call. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, got about a minute to the end of the hour, or the end of this hour. What's up?
Well, I don't think he's going to war. He's just talking. I mean, you're allowed to say pussy on the air, so, I mean, just think of all the times he's backed down from everything else he's said. I do think that we just have to look at everything that comes out of his mouth at this point in the context of you know, somebody melting down. That he's, you know, even 2 years ago, 3 years ago, he wasn't even cognizant of half the things that were coming out of.
But what if he thinks that Saudi Arabia will pay for a bot army to defend him on Facebook and Twitter? What if he thinks that Saudi Arabia will fund hackers who will go after our election infrastructure? What if he thinks Saudi Arabia is going to funnel a bunch of money into his election campaign?
Right. Well, it's not the election. It would have to be directly into his pocket because he's got money coming from.
Oh no, he's worried about re-election right now because if he doesn't get re-elected, he goes to jail.
Listening to Thom Hartmann.
I got to run, Len. Thank you. Oh, there we are. We'll be back in just a few minutes. It's coming up on the top of the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins. But then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama with Karl Rove, or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion. And desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out, back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just recently, and Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, oh, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? I mean, remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women at parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you got the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. I mean, it's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt, sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the hour, the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And, you know, it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. A couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time. And I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, this is a fundamental question, do we want to have in the United States? And welcome back, Thom Hartmann here with you. So remember this? This was Trump in a campaign rally back in 2016.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me, they spend 40 million, 50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
Right, he loves Saudi Arabia. They give him lots and lots of money. Something is rotten in Denmark, as they say. Over the last hour, we've been talking about, we went through the history of the Yemen war. We went through the history of Saudi Arabia, from the Wahhabists to Osama bin Laden, how George Bush the Elder's little war, on behalf of Kuwait with Iraq, led to the creation of a U.S. Air Force base in Saudi Arabia, which is why Osama bin Laden struck us on 9/11. Something that, I think most Americans, if you were to say, why did bin Laden hit us on 9/11? They say, well, he hated us. Oh, wait a minute, he used to work for us. He was part of the Mujahideen. They were trying to throw the Soviets out of Afghanistan. We were funding him. Go back and watch the movie, Charlie Wilson's War. Read the book. So why did he suddenly start hating us? Because we built an Air Force base for George Bush Sr., for his little war in Iraq, his little 100-hour war, so that he could get himself reelected. Didn't quite work out, but that was his plan. Have a little war, get reelected, like Reagan did with Grenada. LBJ thought it was a great idea. Let's have a little war in Vietnam. That didn't work out so well either. I don't know about Harry Truman in Korea. I don't know if there were, if he was trying to get himself reelected or not. But in any case, that didn't work. I mean, that led right to Dwight Eisenhower saying, I'm the peace candidate. Vote for peace. Vote for Eisenhower, 1952. But in any case, we went through all that, and here we are with Donald Trump saying, I love the Saudis. They give me money. You just heard him say that. And then he's saying, Saudi Arabia bought, a couple of days ago, he said, they want $400 million worth of stuff from us. No, it's nothing close to that. But they're still, they're buying $400 billion. They're buying billions of dollars worth of military from us, certainly. Not from us, though. Not from you and me. They're buying it from the billionaires in the defense industry and the multimillionaires in the defense industry, who are people who help prop up the political parties and the candidates and all this kind of stuff. So that's happening. And we'll continue the conversation about, what should we do about this? I think, frankly, what we need to do is we need to take back, Congress needs to take back the power to make war. They need to repeal their authorization to use military force that was passed after 9/11 so that George W. Bush could invade Afghanistan, where bin Laden had his little camp. And this was after Mullah Omar said, hey, we'll arrest him, turn him over to third-party government, no problem. As long as he gets a fair trial, we're good with that. And Bush said, no, I want to have a war with you. And Congress said, here you go, George, have a war. And then Bush used that same AUMF to attack a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. Afghanistan only peripherally had anything to do with 9/11. 9/11, remember, was 17 Saudis, right? Who was in the air the day after 9/11 when all the planes were grounded? The members of the bin Laden family from all over the United States and the Saudi royal family going back to Saudi Arabia. Gee, what a sweet thing. And we're supposed to fight a war with, on behalf of Saudi Arabia, a country that we do not have a mutual defense treaty with. We do with, European countries, that's NATO. We do with Israel. I mean, there's a number of countries we do with Japan. There's a bunch of countries, South Korea, with whom we have mutual defense treaties. Saudi Arabia is not one of them. And when the founders put this country together and the framers put the Constitution together, they were very clear about the fact that they did not want the guy who was in charge of running the military to be able to say how the military got used. That should be the branch of government that is closest to the people, because it gets the entire House of Representatives gets reelected every 2 years. And so the will of the people would be echoed not through the president, but through the House of Representatives. And there would be a public debate about going to war. Article 1 of the Constitution says explicitly, only Congress can make war, declare war. Now, we've had a bunch of wars that Congress didn't declare. The last war that Congress declared was World War II. And we need to go back to those values. We need to go back, values. We need to go back to the Constitution. By the way, for those of you out there who are economics wonks, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Richard Wolff typically is in on Thursdays. Is he coming on Thursday this week, Sean? He's not. Okay. Well, I'd like to reach out to him and find out what he thinks about this. But this is the top story at the Financial Times, and I'm guessing that this has to do with a freak out around the possibility that we could be going to war. But here's the story. This is by Sam Sampson, Joe Rennison, Colby Smith, and Robin Wigglesworth. It was just posted an hour ago on FT.com, the Financial Times newspaper, their website. The Federal Reserve has injected billions of dollars into the U.S. financial system, specifically $75 billion, to alleviate a dramatic squeeze in the country's short-term funding market. Now, this is the these are called overnight repurchase agreements, or repos. Basically, it's cycling U.S. Treasuries. The cost of borrowing cash in exchange for U.S. Treasuries overnight using repurchase agreements, known as repos, surged between Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning to as high as 10%, an increase of more than fourfold. Refinitiv data show. Repos are an important way for borrowers to raise short-term funding by agreeing to buy and sell securities over very short time frames. As such, they are a vital lubricant of the financial system. The sudden tightening of the market caused a predicament for the Fed, just as top policymakers are meeting in Washington to make a decision on monetary policy. So something's going on. I mean, you look at the graph in this article in the Financial Times, and there's just this sudden spike, 10% for overnight Fed funds. Whoa, something's going on here. And I'm not quite sure what it is, but it sure does sound like the system just got very illiquid, and that's what happened in 2008. after Lehman Brothers closed down. So we'll see where that goes to. Anyhow, there's so much else going on. The Trump's Turnberry scandal keeps getting worse. Mark Sumner over at Daily Kos writing about this. First, we heard that the planes were stopping at this airport that serves Trump's property in Scotland to keep the airport open, right? And then we heard, well, and the guys from the Air Force can go stay at the Trump hotel, and that it happened 4 times. And then we learned, no, it happened 40 times. And now Politico reports that, this is quoting Mark Sumner, Air Force officers and crew have been dropping in at Turnberry for extended stays, 5 days or more, which has earned them a pride pin as Turnberry VIPs. And these have been government-funded trips, not personal stays. They hit the links every day. Not only did the military pay for some R&R at the Trump facility, but it also picked up the tab on souvenirs. And conveniently, Mark points out, this didn't happen during the peak summer season. This seems to happen mostly during the winter when there's not much business at Turnberry. Isn't that sweet? Meanwhile, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is joining Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Emily's List and Planned Parenthood Action Fund and NARAL Pro-Choice America and Move On and Progressive Change Campaign Committee and Democracy for America, joining all of them in endorsing Marie Newman, who is the 2020 House primary challenger to Democratic Representative Dan Lipinski. He's a sitting Democrat. And all these people are endorsing the person challenging him, Marie Newman. Why? Well, because Dan Lipinski he's anti-abortion. He's anti-LGBTQ. He voted against Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And he refused to endorse Barack Obama for re-election in 2012. Refused to endorse him. So I don't live in or anywhere near Lipinski's district. This is in Illinois, near Chicago. But if you do and you have thoughts on that, I'm curious to see how you think this is going to play out. An amazing story in Politico about the oil industry versus the electric car. I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff going on here. I'll get into some more of it in just a few minutes. It is, right now, 16 minutes past the hour. We'll pick up your phone calls, too, about, what should we be doing? How do we do this? Is the United States going to go to war or not? Where does this all lead us? I think that if we're all not calling our members of Congress right now, 202-225-3121, and saying no war with Iran, that we may end up with a real bad headache.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
As in, oh my God, I can't believe that we bought that war headache. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Aesop in Hollywood. Hey, Aesop, what's up?
I just wanted to call to make a reminder for people to think that the possibility of a war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the Sunnis and the Shiites, makes sense. And I'm talking as an ex-Marine, but I remember when I was a kid, I read Gulliver Travels by Jonathan Swift. Mm-hmm. He had one kingdom going to war with another kingdom over which side of an egg one was supposed to open when one was having a soft-boiled egg.
Really? I mean, I remember the story of the Lilliputians, but I never actually read the book. That's remarkable. It's remarkable. Yeah. So we're about there, I think, and I agree with you. Aesop, thank you very much for sharing that story. Kevin in San Pedro. Hey, Kevin, what's up?
Hey, all right. Do the Democrats have enough of a majority in Congress to defund this? Can they just pull the purse strings and say, no, we're not gonna fund this.
It's too late. The military budget, the military appropriations bill, has to be approved every 2 years. It's a must-pass bill because Congress only allows the Army to be funded for, the Constitution only allows the Army to be funded for a 2-year period. And that passed 6 to 8 months ago, something like that, and Trump signed it. So, and it was a 2-year bill because they wanted to get it out past the election. They did not want, this to become a contentious issue in the election. And I think the Democrats went along with it just because they didn't want to be accused of being anti-military as they were going into an election, which is real unfortunate, but that's what happened.
No, and not to mention that every military contract has something made in just about every congressional district.
Yes.
So anybody that votes against it is done. And then real quick, when you talked about World War II, actually after the Japanese bombed us, Germany had a defense agreement with Japan in case the Americas attacked. So what Hitler's generals told him is, we don't need to be involved in this. And then Hitler turned around and declared war on us. And then we turned around and declared war on Japan and Germany.
Right.
So Germany actually declared war on those before we declared war on them.
Oh, that's interesting. I vaguely recall that.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. Thank you for taking the call.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's fascinating stuff. Amazing. George W. Bush went AWOL from the military. He actually deserted. If you're AWOL for more than 31 days, you're a deserter. He deserted. He left Texas and went to Alabama and, rented a house that he trashed and spent a year being drunk during the Vietnam War. And when Dan Rather reported it, what happened? Dan Rather lost his job. I mean, Lawrence O'Donnell reported that Donald Trump is having Russian oligarchs co-sign his loans. And what happens? Lawrence O'Donnell gets criticized, not Donald Trump. I mean, are we going to see that all over again, too? We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. It's 21 minutes past the hour. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
thomhartmann.com, so check it out. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, this is just absolutely amazing. The strategies that are being used. Speaking of which, I mean, we are now an oil exporting country. Fracking produced a lot of this, and there's a lot of questions around how long fracked oil will last. But we've got that, and then of course there's the pipeline oil coming from Canada and whatnot. But we are now an oil exporting country. We do not need to go to war on behalf of Saudi Arabia. We don't need their oil. China and India do. And, maybe if they want to go to war with Iran, and the word on the street, the word I'm hearing is that Mohammed bin Salman, Mr. Bonesaw, MBS, has actually been saying to people around him, hey, war with Iran wouldn't be such a bad idea. Their war with Yemen is not going well at all. I mean, they've killed tens of thousands of people, thousands of children. And they have literally millions, perhaps as many as 10 million people who are on the verge of starvation. You've got the world's largest outbreak of cholera going on. All of this happening in Yemen right now because Saudi Arabia decided that they were going to intervene in a civil war. Because the people who were winning the civil war were Shia Muslims, not Sunni Muslims. And now the Yemenis fought back and bombed Saudi Arabia. Now, whether they did it through, with the help of, or via Iran, who knows? Or Iraq, for that matter, which has now become a client state of Iran, although we still have soldiers there, and that's pretty weird. But George W. Bush's war in Iraq basically turned Iraq over to Iran. So anyhow, wherever this came from, now Donald Trump is saying, well, I'm waiting to hear from the king about what we will do. Or from the kingdom, he said, actually, from the prince. It's remarkable. What happened to our Constitution? Meanwhile, here in the United States, if we want to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, or any oil for that matter, and if we want to clean up our environment and save the world from melting down, we need electric cars. And in order to have electric cars, we need charging stations, right? Once there's enough charging stations around, people will start thinking, wow, I could easily have an electric car. They have incredible pickup. I mean, you stomp the pedal down on an electric car, and you get pinned back in your seat. They have pickup. You can't get that kind of torque out of a gasoline engine. You just can't do it, literally. Not without an enormous number of gears. So now you've got the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, which is a trade group for the gasoline manufacturers, are filing comments against plans in Kansas and Missouri, and they opposed a plan in Colorado to have more charging stations, more electric charging stations. In Illinois and Iowa, American Petroleum Institute joining with Americans for Prosperity, the Koch thing, to oppose utilities' electric vehicle investments. This is from an article in Politico by Gavin Bade, by the way, titled "The Oil Industry versus the Electric Car." The Western States Petroleum Association has opposed utility charging plans in Arizona. Americans for Prosperity is opposing these as well as electric vehicle legislation in California. And in Maryland, API aligned with convenience stores, gas stations, and truck stop owners to stop utilities' electric vehicle plans. All over the country, we've got organizations that make their money off or are aligned with people who make their money off fossil fuels fighting against electric utilities putting up charging stations for cars. It is absolutely bizarre. And meanwhile, you've got 26 states now that have electric vehicle fees, making it more expensive. So, by 2040, we could have 40% of our cars being electric, which would be great, except that these people are fighting the hell out of this. I think they would much rather we went to war to protect Mohammed bin Salman and Saudi oil than save the planet by having electric cars. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your calls after this. Stick around. Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins. But then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama, with Karl Rove, and or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion. And desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just recently, and Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? I mean, remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women at parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you get the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. I mean, it's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt. Sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the hour, the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. So a couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, this is a fundamental question, do we want to have in the United States media available to us that goes beyond the conventional wisdom line, that goes beyond the corporate line, that goes beyond the acceptable, in quotes, news line, and actually expands the story a little bit, gives more depth and more detail? It's not just, all sports all the time. Who's ahead, who's behind? Call 877-378-8669 now. Thanks.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We must hold near and dear. the case against free speech. Hey, we just put up a new video for supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com, talking about the relationship between Fox News, Rupert Murdoch. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, you know, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, you know, the supporters. And welcome back. This is interesting. Mark Sumner, writing over at the Daily Kos, he said, you know, they're talking about these drone attacks on Saudi Arabia. He says, there's the little fact that drones coming from Iran would have had to sail 200 miles across the Persian Gulf, right over the heads and through the radars of the U.S. Navy. And they're quite visible on radar. So, you know, is Trump really saying that these drone attacks came from Iran? Or is he simply trying to say that the drones were purchased from Iran? And, you know, anyhow, it's all a mess. Dennis in Tacoma. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Hey, good morning. Here's my question: we're talking about these drone attacks. We're talking about going to war, and you just brought up the fact that, which I didn't know, that it had to travel that far through U.S. Intelligence, some of the best in the world.
Yeah, to get to Saudi Arabia, you got to cross the Persian Gulf if you're coming out of Iran.
Yeah. So here's my question: what makes us think that this was about anything other than inflating fuel prices for the world? I mean, how long has that facility been in service? Is it time for that facility to be upgraded? And was it done on purpose to blow it up and create an inflated fuel price around the world and drive big money?
Or was it done on purpose in order to justify Saudi Arabia having a war with Iran, which apparently is something that Mr. Bonesaw wants?
Well, you know, I don't know about the Saudi Arabia-Iran war. You know, that's you. But what I see, you know, and I don't have enough to speak to that, but what I see is just capitalism, you know, unbridled, unrestrained greed side of capitalism. I agree with capitalism, but not the greedy capitalism. Is this a ploy for greedy capitalism?
Yeah.
The sacrifice of people.
You know, I don't think any of us know the answer to that question, Dennis, but let's stay tuned. Russell in Hickory Hills, Illinois, you wanted to explain to me why Dan Lipinski keeps winning as a Democrat in a heavily Democratic district, even though he's anti-choice, he's anti-LGBTQ people, he refused to vote for the Obamacare bill, and he refused to endorse Barack Obama in 2012 for re-election. What's going on?
Because, Tom, we have open primaries. And let me tell you, the Republicans run to him. His district
so you got Republicans voting in the Democratic primary.
Voting for him and drove. He only won by 1,200. His district is getting less blue dog Democrat, like, you know, our suburbs. Right. It's getting younger, more liberal. But see, but then we turn around and do the same thing to their Republicans we don't like. We turn and take one of their seats and we go against the guy running against a Republican. Right. Let's be honest, if you were here, Bruce Browner destroyed the Republican name.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that, Russell. So this is a good argument against open primaries. Yeah, remarkable. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Adam in Dallas, Texas. Hey, Adam, what's up?
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was going to say, you're really respected with me, and I think you're really intelligent. And
but
the only thing I disagree with you on is your statement that 9/11 was carried out by these Osama bin Laden and these Saudi hijackers and things like that, and it's not established fact. What that originated from was hearsay claims from newscasters that repeated this, and it's just become.
Adam, I'm not going to relitigate the 9/11 conspiracies. I'm just not going to go there. Fritz in Palm Desert, California. Hey, Fritz, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I just wanted to correct perception that you gave when you were talking about states that are putting fees on electric cars.
Yeah, they're doing that mostly because because the way that we repair our freeways is with the gas tax, and electric cars don't pay gas tax. I bought 1 gallon, 1 tank of gasoline in the last year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted you to bring up. This isn't an attack on on electric cars. Now, the charging stations I can't speak for. I live in California, so we're ahead of the game. But as far as the reason why...
Yeah, your point is well taken, Fritz, and you're absolutely right, and I probably should have pointed that out at the time that I was reading the article. Spot on. Thank you. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up? Nice article you just put up, by the way, over at opednews.com. That was fascinating. So what's on your mind?
Oh, I can't believe you just gave me that kind of plug. I'm gobsmacked. Let me just say this to you.
You're a damn good writer. Come on. So what's on your mind?
Listen, not all cowards are bullies, but all bullies are cowards.
I agree.
And Donald Trump is a coward. And I'm studying the preamble is to say this, Tom. The United States is not a snowball's chance in perdition going to go to war with Iran. And let me briefly substantiate what I'm saying to you. First of all, the United States has not been in a conflict where there has been major carnage for Americans. I'm talking about body bags by the thousands in probably 40, 50 years.
Yeah, since Vietnam.
Exactly. Americans are not familiar with what war really is. They think they can fight wars with drones and missiles, but let me tell you something. You start talking about a nation with Iran with formidable military assets. I'm talking about conventional military assets. Not only that, economic assets and asymmetric assets. Let me tell you something. You're talking about dead Americans by the thousands. Yeah. Not only that, we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, which may be already mined or could be mined. You're talking about taking an economic hit on the United States taking an economic hit. The American public does not have the stomach for this stuff, Tom.
You know, they war-gamed this stuff a couple of years ago, Kenyatta, and I don't recall if it was pre or post-Trump, but 3, 4, 5 years ago in that neighborhood, in that window, maybe you remember better than I do, they actually war-gamed this at the Pentagon, and it was leaked that we lost the war. That we took huge casualties, that they wiped out the 5th Fleet?
Huge casualties. Yeah. We're talking huge casualties. And the U.S. public are used to these Hollywood wars. This is not going to be Hollywood, Tom.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you, Kenyatta, and I think it's unlikely that we're going to go to war. I think it's unlikely, for a couple of reasons. The reasons that you just pointed out. Number one, we would probably lose it, or at least our casualties would be so high that there would be no public support for it. Number two, I don't think Donald Trump really wants to go to war. He campaigned on being, an anti-war president. Whether he's going to keep that or not. But my concern is that he's just so erratic and unstable that particularly, keep in mind, 4 or 5 different times back in 2012, he was tweeting about how, Barack Obama isn't going to win re-election unless he goes to war, right? This is what this guy thinks. Wars get presidents reelected. It's a Republican, song and dance that goes way, way back. And if he feels that he is facing a serious legal threat, if he feels that there's a good chance he's going to lose the election, and therefore he and some members of the Trump crime family are going to go to jail, all bets are off.
Well, I'll tell you what, Tom. If I think that's very unlikely, but if that happens, let me tell you something. The American public is in for something it hasn't seen in half a century.
Yeah, I agree with you. And maybe even something we haven't seen in 75 years, since World War II. I'm with you. Yep. Kenyatta, thank you. And keep up the great writing over there at opednews.com. Nancy in Georgia. Hey, Nancy, what's up?
Hey, talk to me, Tom. I want to say that we have lost a bright, shining, clear light in Cokie Roberts' passing, and in loving memory of her, man, I would like to make a clear, succinct statement about something that's been stuck in my craw since the George Bush administration.
Go for it.
Okay. They made a loophole in the law that suspended habeas corpus, thereby undoing 700 years of law. It took out a cornerstone of democracy and the law in general. That needs to be fixed by any Democrat. It needs to be looked in. You're better connected than I am, but Guantanamo Bay is still open. We got concentration camps on the border with children in them. We got something, all of a sudden, a computer system that doesn't work. They can't tag families that belong together. Yeah. Come on. This fascism thing, this 40%, we got 2 prison systems. Do we have 2 armies going on in here? What the hell is going on? Yeah. And I'm just saying that the American people and all this legal stuff, and Jerry Nadler, he's saving the country, he's such a patriot. But please put this on your list of things to do. Restore habeas corpus.
I am with you, Nancy. I am absolutely with you. Thank you for the call. We'll be back. It is 15 minutes before the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
In about 4 minutes, we'll be checking in with Talk Media News to find out what the latest is and how Corey Lewandowski's doing. I believe it's going to be Doug Christian with us today. And welcome back. Tim in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. First of all, long time, first time. Love the show and everything you've been doing.
Thank you.
Been listening to progressive radio since the days of Air America, so It's been a while here. I just wanted to clarify a point on this electric vehicle taxation thing. One of the reasons we do taxes is to change behaviors as well, not just compensate the public for your use on the public roads. And, these vehicle laws are being driven by the Koch brothers network and farmed out to all the states to punish people that want to drive electric cars now.
Yep.
One of the things that I'm doing, driving an electric car, is preventing pollution that's caused by gasoline that harms children, right? So that's just one of the side effects of what I'm doing. I should be encouraged to do that. I should be encouraged to adopt new technology, and this is just a way for the gas companies to gouge us for a few more years. So that's my comment.
Yeah, I'm with you. As I said, I've bought, I think, 1 tank of gas in the last 12 months. We have a plug-in Prius. It's a plug-in hybrid, and it runs 30 miles on pure electricity, and boy, does it have pickup. And then after that, a gas motor kicks in, and it'll take you another 400 miles. And, because it's 15 miles from one side of Portland to the other, more or less, we haven't had to buy gasoline in forever. In fact, I have to, once a month turn on the electric motor or the gasoline motor just so it doesn't seize up, just to rotate the oil. Yeah. And we're getting our electricity from the Bonneville Dam.
I haven't bought gas in 10 years, so it's even possible.
Good on you, Tim.
Better,
good on you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the call. Gary in Baden, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Thank you.
Hey, what's up? Greed has no heart.
Greed has no heart ever, and the man brought up greed, and kind of coincidental, and thank you. I'm going to kind of cut to the chase as quickly as I can. All this what we're talking about, you talked about the word, and me and you were tremendously on the same subject. It's called corruption at the highest levels. Yeah. And it's led by the blowhard in chief. And I think he's becoming more desperate. Little incrementally, and why? Because of the election and his ego. Yeah. And I'm very concerned The American people desire, I believe, they desire stability and they desire the rule of law. And this so-called man is undermining that.
Both.
So I believe in addition, pardon me?
I said you're absolutely right. He's undermining both stability and the rule of law because he's an unstable crook, con man.
Right, he is. And about the war thing, before I close, I think, and I couldn't agree with you more, and I was just telling Lori this, Tom just mentioned it. I believe as time goes on, when he feels can't win Michigan, he can't win Pennsylvania, this may be an option for him to go into some kind of war type situation to boost him in the polls.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And that's the thing that concerns me the most. I mean, this is a guy who puts babies in cages. He's capable of anything. He puts babies in cages. And the damage to these kids now, we're just now starting to realize. And, we think that he's going to behave rationally. I'm not willing to buy that one. We're going to check in with Doug Christian with Talk Media News in just a moment. Hopefully he'll know what the latest is on Corey Lewandowski's testimony, which seems to be going on. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Stick around. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Today's report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is Doug Christian. Hey, Doug. I understand that Corey Lewandowski is refusing to answer any questions that have to do with Trump. He's saying, I'm respecting executive privilege.
And Trump is loving it. He just tweeted. He just said, what a beautiful opening. I just love what he's doing. Of course Trump would love this. Lewandowski is obstructing justice, and the whole reason that he was brought over to the Judiciary Committee in the House, subpoenaed, was that it was to testify regarding what the Mueller report had said, that he had been asked to persuade then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to reverse his recusal and set new limits on the Mueller probe. So Lewandowski is doing Trump's bidding.
Yeah, apparently. What else is up in the world? Where are we at with regard to the Iran? This Donald Trump saying he's waiting for Mr. Bonesaw to tell him what to do with regard to Iran.
I don't think anybody really knows right now. I mean, I think the only person who knows is either Trump or the Saudis. I mean, he seems to have a closer relationship with them than he does with our own intelligence community.
Right.
And I mean, one of the things that's most concerning is that for most people in this town is that Trump, in order to protect them or protect his ego, could do whatever they want in order to combat their arch enemy, Iran, which could mean American soldiers die. It's a very, very
my big concern is
thing.
that if he gets pushed into a corner where he thinks he's going to lose an election or be prosecuted or both, that this is the ultimate ace in the hole in his mind, is to have a war. I mean, that's what he was saying in 2012 was Obama. That he was saying that's how Obama was thinking in 2012. It wasn't. Turns out it wasn't. But obviously, that's the way Trump was thinking.
It very well may be. I mean, that's the difference between speculation or opinion and news. Is that it seems to make sense that could happen.
Right, but that's speculation. You're right. So back to the news. What else is going on in the world that we need to know about, Doug?
Well, unfortunately, the news is part of the news today. And that is, of course, when the New York Times published their opinion piece about Brett Kavanaugh.
You mean that book excerpt?
A book excerpt, that's right. And one of the things that has happened is that they had neglected to articulate that the woman in this piece had at least claimed that she had forgotten about the whole event herself, and that it was actually it was other eyewitnesses that actually saw this.
Right.
And of course, it's been tremendously embarrassing for the New York Times, and Trump has just gone to town with it. This has just been this is a gift to Donald Trump, and he has just gone with it. And he has said he tweets. The New York Times is at its lowest point in its long and storied history. Not only is it losing a lot of money, but it is a journalistic disaster, being laughed at in even the most liberal of enclaves. It has become a very sad joke all over the world. Witch hunt hurt them. That story, Kavanaugh, is nowhere near the standard that should be set in publishing a story. Unfortunately, and that was actually quoted, he was quoting Brit Hume there. Unfortunately, the trouble is that the Times, as Brit Hume is right, the Times did not accede to actually hold to their own journalistic standards, even though it was an opinion piece in the opinion section of the Sunday New York Times.
Right, but it was, and it was also a book excerpt, and so that information may have been elsewhere in the book. I don't know. I don't think the book has been published yet, but it's still. I mean, there are still multiple witnesses to this, and this woman says that when she was reminded of it, she was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that now."
That's exactly right, and the thing is that it absolutely could have happened. It's just that the problem is that if journalists don't hone exactly to the standards of what they set, then the people will run all over it.
And the people on the other side pounce. But what Trump is doing, he's setting up a false equivalency here between like Breitbart or the news sources that he likes, Fox. I mean, read MediaMatters.org. Fox literally lies every single day. And they distort the news aggressively and enthusiastically. Donald Trump lies every single day. And he's tried to say that the New York Times is the equivalent of those things because they screwed up one story by not putting a qualifier on one statement. And this is just like George W. Bush going after Dan Rather for reporting on his being AWOL when nobody was disputing the fact that he was AWOL. He was a deserter from the Texas Air National Guard, which has some pretty severe penalties. What they were saying was, one of those papers that Dan Rather has, you can't authenticate it. And it was like, oh my God, Dan Rather loses his job over this and George W. Bush gets reelected. I mean, that's what they're trying to do. This is but there's more. I think it's despicable. Doug Christian with Talk Media News. Thank you, Doug.
You bet.
Yeah, good talking with you. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you. Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins. But then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama with Karl Rove, or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion. And desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out, back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just recently, and Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? Remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women in parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you get the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. I mean, it's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt, sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the hour, the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And you know, it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. So a couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, I mean, this is a fundamental question. Do we want to have in the United States media available to us that goes beyond the conventional wisdom line, that goes beyond the corporate line, that goes beyond the acceptable, in quotes, news line, and actually expands the story a little bit, gives more depth and more detail? It's not just, you know, all sports all the time. Who's ahead, who's behind? Call 877-378-8669 now. Thanks.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Popular school of thought sees Russia under Putin as a weak and declining power. The book, The Russia Trap.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Seth Moran has been looking into the possibility of volcanic eruptions in the Pacific Northwest, among other things. He's a scientist in charge at the Cascades Volcano Observatory, part of the U.S. Geological Survey. usgs.gov is the website. Dr. Moran, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You're talking about a volcano in my backyard, specifically Mount Hood. You say it's silent now. It won't last. It won't stay that way. Why is this a concern? And why do we not know more about it that we should know?
Yeah, well, we know enough about Mount Hood to understand what it's done in the last couple 100,000 years. We know that it most recently erupted in 1781, and that was about a dozen-year-long eruption. And before that, it was about 1,500 years ago. Before that, it was maybe almost 10,000 years. So it's been sort of spotty in terms of how frequently it's erupted. That's one of the concerns, is that we don't necessarily know. Is it going to erupt in a decade or 100 years or another couple thousand years? And we have to treat it as if it could wake up tomorrow. There are signs that it is still, an alive system, in the sense that there are earthquake swarms that happen there fairly routinely. There's some volcanic gases that come out of the vent that fed the 1781 eruption, and that's one of the few volcanoes in the Cascades that still emits volcanic gases. So there are definitely signs that we should be expecting it to erupt again. The $60 million question is when.
Yeah, and maybe a multi-billion-dollar question, since this thing is visible from downtown Portland. I mean, it's just right up the road from us. If this volcano melts, correct me if I'm wrong, there are glaciers on Mount Hood. Wouldn't that melt an enormous amount of ice, and couldn't that flood the Columbia River and take out Portland and other places?
Well, the first couple things for sure. Portland's a fair distance away. It would certainly be, if there was a full-on eruption, it would certainly disrupt the greater Portland area to varying degrees. The places that are of most concern, obviously, are the ones that are close. Mm-hmm. And Mount Hood is relatively unique in the Cascades in that it has a year-round residents that live in what we would consider to be the sort of the near field, places where things could happen fairly fast, and it wouldn't take a very large eruption to have a fairly large impact on the ski areas, government camp, the highways that go past their Highway 26, Highway 35.
Right.
Certainly back in 1781, there were mud flows, what we call lahars, that were produced by eruptions that melted snow and ice and water flowed down the Sandy and certainly reached into the Columbia. And actually the leftover sediment from that has formed the Sandy River Delta that goes out into the Columbia.
Oh, that's interesting. So I think one of the larger issues here is, this isn't just a local story context. My understanding, and this, from reading articles about this, you and I have not discussed it, and please correct me if I'm wrong or fill me in on this. My understanding is that many of these volcanoes around the country, in Hawaii, the potential volcanic activity around Yellowstone, some of these other volcanoes are actually fairly well monitored. They've got all kinds of stations around them. They're testing for gases. They're testing for activity. But that Mount Hood and a number of other potential volcanoes in the United States are not being well monitored because we have done such a good job of protecting the forests around them, these wilderness areas, that we can't, quote, build a building, which might even just be a little 10-foot square, 20-foot high monitoring station of some kind on the side of a volcano. Do I have that right?
Well, it's certainly a complicated issue, and it's let me go with the first part of your question, that for sure there are volcanoes like Mount St. Helens, which are very well monitored, and Mount St. Helens has had 2 eruptions in the last 40 years, and so it stands to reason that it would be quite well monitored. It's also true in the Cascades that a lot of the other volcanoes that we think have the potential to erupt again are in places that have land use restrictions. There's a number that are in national parks like Mount Rainier and Crater Lake, and there's others that are at least in partial or in total wilderness, and Mount Hood is one of those, and Glacier Peak is another. The land use restrictions are real, and we take them seriously, and our proposals to install instruments are what we feel are kind of the bare minimum for us to be able to do the job and make sure that we can help protect people. There's other reasons why some volcanoes are not as well monitored as others, and one of them has to do with they're incredibly remote. And there's a volcano up in Washington called Glacier Peak that's in the middle of the Glacier Peak wilderness, and there's no roads out there, and there's no infrastructure like antenna towers and things like that we can hang our radio antennas on. And so just the whole question of if we were to put a station out there, getting the data out, there's some infrastructure development that has to happen. And so it's taken us longer to figure out how to work in places where the volcanoes are so remote, the logistics are hard, and frankly also the winters are really rough. And winters can be pretty brutal on instruments. And one of the things that we've learned over the course of working at St. Helens in part is how to build things so that they will last through the winter.
Right. Now, we have, again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, from Alaska all the way down to California, there's 161 active volcanoes. 7 of the 10 most dangerous American volcanoes are in the Cascade Range, and 6 of those are not adequately monitored. Do I have that right?
It's around there, yeah. And by adequate, what we mean is something like on the order of a dozen to 20 or so seismometers and GPS instruments. The seismometers are there for us to record really small earthquakes, and the GPS receivers are there to tell us if the ground is deforming, which would happen if magma starts moving underground. And oftentimes when volcanoes wake up, the initial warning signs can be subtle. The earthquakes can be small. The ground deformation can be also quite small. And so that's the rationale for having that many instruments, 12 to 20. And there's not that many volcanoes that have that level. That being said, a number of the volcanoes have what we would consider to be a basic level. So Mount Rainier is in that category, although it's actually getting close to being where we want it to be. Mount Hood is also in that category. It's got 8 seismometers right now, and that's not bad. The problem there really is that it only has 3 GBS instruments, and that number needs to be greater if we're going to be able to detect deformation on a small scale.
Right. And other countries that have this problem, Japan, Chile, Iceland, are they doing a good and adequate job of monitoring their volcanoes?
Yeah, different countries are doing things in some cases better than we are. Japan is, one of the gold standards out there, and part of the reason perhaps is that their volcanoes erupt more frequently. There have been people that have been killed more recently by volcanoes, and so the hazard is fresher in the minds of people there.
Right.
But Chile more recently also has bolstered its network, and that's also in response to a couple of pretty decently large eruptions that got a lot of people's attention.
Remarkable stuff. Dr. Seth Moran, the scientist in charge at the Cascades Volcano Observatory. Thanks so much for dropping by today.
You're welcome.
Great talking with you. I really do appreciate it. We'll be back in just a minute. We want to get into Corey Lewandowski is refusing to testify to anything, any conversation he had with Donald Trump, even though he never worked in the White House, so he doesn't have the legal right to claim executive privilege. Will he be prosecuted? Is this the moment where Congress should say to the Sergeant at Arms, seize him and take him to the basement and put him in that old jail cell?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And of course, we've been talking about how Donald Trump is waiting for for Mr. Bonesaw in Saudi Arabia to tell him whether or not we should attack Iran. And welcome back. Let's see here. Dave in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Oops.
Dave?
Yeah, sorry, I had problems with technical difficulties.
Quite all right. You're on the air.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the drones. You made a comment before that you couldn't understand how the drones would go across the sea without being monitored.
Right.
The one thing about drones is that they're mobile to launch. So you don't need to, you could launch them from someplace closer, even in the country, and pilot them not a far distance. In fact, they usually don't have that much fuel. So usually their range is actually not that much. So they could have been much closer and smuggled in.
Well, that's the point. If they were fired from Iran, they would have to travel about 200 miles. If they were fired from Yemen, they'd have to travel about 500 miles, which is probably outside the range of these drones. But if they were fired from Iran, they would have to pass right over the top of our fleet in the Gulf.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very skeptical that could happen.
I agree. It must have been someplace closer. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay.
Even if it's smuggled within 200 miles, that's all it takes.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, Dave, thanks a lot for the call. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi, Tom. This is for everybody to listen to. Yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard uploaded a video on YouTube, and the title of it is Trump Offers to Pimp Out Our Military to His Saudi Masters.
Right.
In it, she states very clearly that Trump has betrayed the military by doing that.
Oh, he has said that
and she makes it clear that the military has sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution.
Right. Trump has said that if we go to war to help Saudi Arabia, we're going to charge them hundreds of millions of dollars. And it just, this is a businessman's perspective on war, and it's wrong. It's irrational. It's frankly illegal. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
Just wanted to fill you in. I attended Ron Wyden's town hall meeting several weeks ago. I was, I believe, cool. August 29th.
Uh-huh.
So and my number one topic that I wanted to talk to him about was interstate cross-check and what they were going to do about the voter purges.
Right.
And after the talk, I went up to him and I introduced myself because I am a precinct committee person. And he was, very cordial and friendly. And when I mentioned interstate cross-check, he what, if anything, he was doing about it, he got very grim, quickly said, I can't talk about it, and just tried to get rid of me. And then when I, he just tried to assure me it's all taken care of. And I said to him, well, I talked to Jeff Merkley last year about it. He didn't know anything about it and said nothing was being done.
Whoa.
And he just dismissed me, and that was that. So just wanted to let you know what's going on with that.
Okay. Maybe we should try to get one of them on to talk about it. I don't know. Jonathan, thank you for the heads up. That's pretty shocking stuff. Appreciate the call. If true, of course, I should always throw that caveat on any person who calls in. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the end. I'll be right back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
All this stuff, what's going on from Lewandowski and Trump to Iran and to, how is this going to play out? Donald Trump pimping out the military, to paraphrase Tulsi Gabbard. John in Portland. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Trump's a deal maker, and here's the deal. He made the same deal with the Republican Party that Reagan made, which is, if you give me power, I'll take care of your religious agenda.
Right.
It's the same deal. Now the deal he's making with foreign leaders is, I'll help you get elected if you help me get elected.
I think so.
He's doing with Netanyahu and the deal that he's already made if he loses the election, I bet, is that he's going to go to some country without an extradition treaty, and he's got arrangement. He's got it all worked out already. He'll live in a Trump Tower. He's not going to go to jail.
Yeah,
he's going to go live in some like Moscow or some other country, and I bet he's got that deal all worked out.
I suspect, John, that you are absolutely right. Thank you. Marcos in Ceylon, Minnesota? Do I have it right, Marcos?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Hey, what's up?
Well, just adding to what he said, it's a hypothetical situation if he gets indicted when he leaves office, but I had a question for you. What if he gets sentenced and goes to jail, does the Secret Service go with him?
As a former president, he is entitled to Secret Service protection. I don't know if the Secret Service would protect him in a prison, though. That's a good question.
That's what I was wondering.
It's territory we've never visited in this country before.
Yeah, well, it'll probably be the last time, too.
Yeah, the easy solution.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Marcos. The easy solution is solitary confinement, I suppose. But, I'm not a big fan of that. I think it's torture. But anyhow, Joy in North Fork Valley, Colorado. Hey, Joy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Well, I think we really have to talk about that. Sorry, I get very nervous.
It's quite all right.
We don't come from 200 years of freedom and justice for all. That we really are 500 years of abomination and and genocide. And until we actually recognize that and tell the truth about that, we're never going to be able to actually have peace. And I think that we have to, that all of these wars that are occurring they follow along because we have been being warred upon all this time. And we're not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of indigenous and immigrants. We're not even being taught that. We're not. And in the 70s, when the cannabis plant became, officially warred upon, warring upon a plant that is well known, that the U.S. government knows is a plant of peace and extreme abundance. But all of that warring for 500 years has been that we are so numb to it, we expect to be warred upon. And I think that we have to tell the truth about that. I think we have to have a paper ballot of asking everybody in this country, do you want this cannabis plant, this holy, sacred, amazing plant that gives us peace and food and fiber and medicine and
to be legal? Yeah, I get it, George. I get
a million ways.
Yep.
And so we have to tell the truth about who we really are.
I completely agree, and it's why I devoted the first third of my book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment, to the Native American genocide and slavery. Michael in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Tom, because of you and your show, I am going to be going to a meeting coming up here in our local area about Bernie Sanders. I don't know what the agenda is going to be all yet. But the question I had, you touched on just before one of the prior breaks on what can Congress do with Lewandowski. I was flipping back and forth and kind of watching it. He's doing nothing but stymieing, and I don't see that he has executive privilege.
No, he doesn't. He's breaking the law. He's breaking the law. The question is, will the Democrats hold him to account? And the bet that both he and Trump are making is that the Democrats will not actually enforce the law. And I think that that's, generally speaking, a safe bet. The mechanism to enforce the law requires that the Democrats go to Bill Barr and ask him to handle the prosecution. The prosecutions have to happen through the executive branch, the Department of Justice, and the head of the executive branch right now is Donald Trump, and the head of the police force, essentially, of the United States, all the police functions, is Bill Barr, who's a notorious cover-up artist for Republican con men. He did it for Reagan and Bush back in '92 when he was Attorney General, and he's doing it for Trump right now. He even lied to the American people about what was in Mueller's report. So
they can't. They can't get the sergeant of arms or anybody that's somewhat independent to prosecute him?
I'm very skeptical that they could do it, and I'm certain they won't do it. I wish they would. I would love to see the Democrats stand up and have a spine. I think that they're concerned that if they start going down this road, that might happen, the next time the Republicans control Congress, that it just is going to, it would be the beginning of the descent into a mire, a swamp of some kind. For example, Justice Beerbong Weenie was never held to account either. And he obviously now lied before the United States Senate, or at least before the Judiciary Committee. So, I'm not real hopeful, but we'll see.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call, Michael. We'll see. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Maybe I'm missing something. If Lewandowski is breaking the law by refusing to testify under subpoena, what else could be done? Just a quick reminder, the telephone number to call right now and support this program and this network is 877-378-8669, 877-378-8669. Remember back in the day, almost 20 years ago, when George W. Bush was running for president in 2000, and the story came out that his daddy, first of all, who was a congressman at the time, used political influence to get his son, George W., into the Texas Air National Guard, the TANG, into this elite Champagne unit that basically would never have to go off to Vietnam. This was at the height of the Vietnam War, and George W. Bush did not want to go. But Daddy said, you got to do a military service, son, if you want to have a political future. Daddy, of course, was a World War II veteran. So George joins. But then after, a little less than a year in the Texas Air National Guard, George W. decides, screw this. And he moves to Alabama with Karl Rove, or where Karl Rove was from, and rents a house and turns it into a party house and spends the whole year just in a drunken stupor. They so trashed the house that his family had to reimburse the people who owned the house to the tune of over $20,000, and swinging from chandeliers and God only knows what else. And all that time he was absent without leave. Being AWOL for more than 30 days under the Uniform Code of Military Justice is desertion. And desertion during time of war is, punishable by serious response. Years and years in prison, expulsion from the military, all kinds of horrible stuff. George W. Bush was clearly not just AWOL, but a deserter to the Texas Air National Guard. And when the story came out back, when he was running for president, there were numerous sources reporting on it. Dan Rather quoted one person who had some paperwork that basically proved this. The paperwork wasn't entirely copacetic. It turned out at least one of the pages might have been forged. We never did find out. But as a consequence of that, the media shifted their focus from the guy running for president being a deserter to Dan Rather might have used a flaky source. And Dan Rather lost his job, and that was the end of the story. Remember that? Remember when Donald Trump was getting all his money from Deutsche Bank, and nobody else was going to lend him a dime, and the story broke really big on MSNBC. This was just recently, and Lawrence O'Donnell had a source, and he quoted the source, and then he couldn't corroborate it, and so the story completely no longer was about Donald Trump having Russian oligarchs co-sign loans with Deutsche Bank. Instead, the story became, Lawrence O'Donnell's a bad journalist. Remember that? I mean, remember when all these women were coming forward and saying Brett Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted them, or they had seen him sexually assault women at parties in high school and college, and suddenly, this week, suddenly the story became about whether the New York Times deleted a name from a story or changed a headline or a tweet. It's like the corporate media loves distraction. They love drama, and they really don't love trashing Republicans, because Republicans really represent the interests of corporate media. It's that simple. Oligarchy, big money, all these kind of things. Well, if you want to know the real story, watch Free Speech TV and tell your friends and neighbors and relatives to watch Free Speech TV and support this network and this show. You can do it now by calling 877-378-8669. With a $20 gift, you get the Thom Hartmann University bumper sticker. With a $30 gift, you get the Donald Trump small hand soap. This is a great gag gift. I mean, it's just spectacular. With a $50 gift, you get the Change the Channel Free Speech TV tote bag. With a $100 gift, the Any Functional Adult long sleeve shirt, sizes small through XXL. With a $50 gift, you get my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, an autographed copy. With a $250 gift, we'll hang out online. We'll do a virtual meet and greet. And with a $1,000 gift, come here to Portland, hang out on our couch for the hour, the last hour of the show, and we'll go next door and have lunch, or down the street actually a ways, and have lunch. And it's great. I have met some just spectacular people. So a couple of really great people stopped by last weekend. In fact, I had a wonderful time, and I look forward to meeting you. So those are the premiums. But the bottom line is, regardless of the premiums, do we want to have, this is a fundamental question, do we want to have in the United States media available to us that goes beyond the conventional wisdom line, that goes beyond the corporate line, that goes beyond the acceptable, in quotes, news line, and actually expands the story a little bit, gives more depth and more detail. It's not just, all sports all the time. Who's ahead, who's behind? Call 877-378-8669 now. Thanks. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program
So,
on
and
Facebook, Twitter,
a story
and
that I
Instagram.
saw this morning, I mentioned this earlier in the program, but I really didn't quite know what to make of it. But it really caught my attention. It was at the top of the Financial Times about an hour ago. It's the #2 story right now. It says the cost for borrowing cash in exchange for U.S. Treasuries overnight, known as repos or repurchase agreements, it jumped to as high as 10%, an increase of fourfold. And as a consequence of this, the Fed just dumped $75 billion into the economic system or into the banking system. I don't understand this, and I wanted to find somebody who did. So Professor Richard Wolff is with us, our old friend, who the economist and author of numerous books. Professor Wolff, and democracyatwork.info, his website. Welcome back to the program. Can you explain to me what's going on here?
Well, I can try, but partly the mystery is the deliberate decision of the Federal Reserve not to explain. Maybe it doesn't even know what's going on. But to be simple about it, banks in the United States and some large corporations find themselves day to day sometimes short of money. They have a special need, they have some special problem, probably one they didn't foresee, but they just need the money for a day or two to sort it out. And so there's an enormous market for short-term borrowing. And by short-term, I mean a day or even sometimes a matter of hours. And there is a market that has developed over the years where these kinds of large borrowers can go into the market and borrow short-term money, as I say, for a day or two or three or four. What suddenly happened Monday morning of this week was that the normal availability of that kind of a loan, which was running in the neighborhood of a little bit over 2% per year for a few days, shot up. There wasn't the money available in all the usual places from all the usual banks who had more than they needed to lend it to the banks who had less than they needed. And so suddenly the ones who needed to borrow the money because their need was urgent had to pay not 2.1 or 2%, but suddenly, as you correctly said, it went up to 10%. Then it wobbled for a while at 5%. So the question is, what is going on to make it suddenly so much more expensive to borrow short-term money? And let's remember, any bank that has to pay that kind of extra interest will pass the costs on to its customers, at least as far as it can.
Yeah, well,
Here comes the mystery.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Here comes the mystery. Why? The big question that everybody wants to know is what in the world is going on? And the answer is we don't know. We're getting from the usual financial sources all kinds of calming explanations. The federal government is running a big deficit, so the Treasury is printing lots of Treasury securities,
and somehow people have been buying those, and those people would have otherwise lent their money overnight, so there's a temporary shortage. Whatever it was, the Federal Reserve got extremely anxiety-ridden, knowing that high interest rates were what led us into the crisis and crash of 2008. So what they did was to pump many tens of billions of dollars, literally created the money, flooded the banking system with this new money by buying the Treasury securities that banks already owned in order to replace money in their accounts for the treasuries that the Federal Reserve was buying. And that's the kind of behavior you see in a government agency, that much money literally in minutes, that usually signals, and I'm going to be very polite now, extreme uncertainty, strains, and unusual behavior in financial markets. Given that recession is what's on everybody's mind, everybody can imagine, and they should, that this might be the beginning of something genuinely scary.
The last time, and I'm doing this from memory that's 10 years old, 11 years old, but my recollection is the last time I actually was reporting about repos, about these repurchase agreements, was in 2008. That the same market froze up, and that was why Henry Paulson was out there trembling in front of the cameras saying, "Please, Congress, we need billions of dollars." Am I remembering that right?
Yes, you are. And one of the concerns, which has been heightened by the Federal Reserve's failure to give the public any kind of an official analysis, not that we would necessarily believe them, but it is very troubling that they're not even offering, which of course fuels the notion that they can't tell us what's going on because it would worsen the problem, namely that we have a 2008 situation. And let me remind everyone that your memory is correct, but it was more serious as we then learned, despite the calming denials that were issued then, much as they have been over the last 20 hours. The reality was that everybody in the big financial the big banks, the big corporations, had finally figured out that we were on the edge of a major meltdown. And it was too dangerous to lend money, overnight, even to the biggest, safest banks and corporations that you had lent such money to for years, because you realized, and this was particularly after the collapse of the Lehman Bank, that whoever you lent to might tomorrow morning, before they paid you back, declare bankruptcy, and you would never see your money again. To deal with that risk, suddenly lenders were very hesitant, and borrowers had, as you correctly said, suddenly to pay a 4 times higher interest rate than they were used to because of the nervousness that was beginning to grip financial markets.
Now, in your opinion, if we are looking at something like what happened in 2008, there the precipitating event, although it wasn't the cause. I mean, the cause was all these structural insufficiencies that you and I have talked about a number of times over the years. But is it possible that the triggering event, instead of being the collapse of a bank like Lehman, or the rumor of a collapse, potential collapse of a bank, which makes a lot of sense given what you just said, is it possible that in this case, though, it's not that it is the possibility of a war on behalf of Saudi Arabia with Iran?
It's that, but I think the better way to look at it is with the old adage about the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's never this thing or that thing. If you look at the trade war between the United States and China and the havoc that it is wreaking across the world of manufacturing, not just in the two countries, but in India, in Germany, and all the other countries reporting the negative effects of that. And now you see what drone warfare can do to the oil in the Middle East. And you remember that the world is due for another capitalist recession because they happen every 4 to 7 years, and we're now 9 years or 8 years out of the last one. You put all of those together, and then you begin to have to worry whether what might in other circumstances have been a relatively minor glitch is this time the sign that finally all of that bad news and bad events happening out there are beginning to make major players, financial and non-financial alike, take extraordinary steps like being unwilling to lend money so that suddenly the bank you went to get an overnight loan tells you, no way am I giving you a loan, no matter what your interest rate is. So you then have to scurry to the next big bank. They will say, well, we're not as worried as the first one. If you pay us 10% instead of 2.2%, well, then we'll give it to you. You're going to then begin to see that this isn't a flash in the pan, a one-shot gig. This is the beginning of the next big downturn. And until the Federal Reserve, A, says otherwise, and B, gives us real evidence, we have to keep that as one possibility for what's going on.
So over the next few days or weeks, because all this happened just literally overnight. I mean, this just happened last night. So for the next couple of days or weeks, what should we be looking for in terms of indicators that, it's time to run for cover?
The first thing we should look at is to see whether the interest rates, the overnight repo rates, come back down to about somewhere between 2 and 2.5%, which is where they were. The second thing we should look at is how many tens of billions of dollars the Federal Reserve is pumping in to get that effect. And the third thing we should look at is whether it's working in the sense of going back down or it's bouncing around. If it's bouncing around low, up and down, then that's probably a sign that the nervousness is spreading and that it is now going from one bank to another, and that can go very, very fast. My guess is we'll have a much better idea where we are at the end of this week than we do now, unless the Federal Reserve's anxiety covers all of this over with some news blackout, which I would take as a very, very scary sign.
Wow. Professor Richard Wolff, it is so great to have access to you, sir. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining this for us.
No problem, Tom. Thanks. Glad to do it.
Thank you. democracyatwork.info and rdwolf.com with 2 Fs, the websites. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your thoughts, my thoughts, what's going on in Washington D.C. right now. What do we do about Corey Lewandowski? What should Democrats do? And are we going to go to war with Iran?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
How do you think the military will respond if Trump says, yeah, sure, we'll go to war for Mr. Bonesaw. He's going to pay us hundreds of billions of dollars. Sure, why not? And welcome back. Bill in Santa Maria, California. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm great. What's up?
The missile deal on Saudi Arabia.
Right.
Why is anybody saying Israel?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I mean, today the elections are happening in Israel today. That the more instability, uncertainty, and fear there is in that region, particularly fear of war, the more likely it is that Benjamin Netanyahu who has basically sold his candidacy on fear and and basically a bigotry toward Palestinians, the more likely he gets reelected. I thought it was interesting this morning, the video of him and his wife voting. They were putting paper ballots in a box. Israel, no fools there. They've figured that one out, as most of the rest of the but saying what I just said, I do not want to go the next step and say, therefore, I think that Netanyahu had anything to do with this. It probably worked to his benefit substantially. But the idea that Israel would launch a false flag operation against Saudi Arabia in order for Netanyahu to stay out of jail and get himself reelected is, I think that's a real stretch.
I just kind of wondered why nobody's talking about it, and I hope you're bringing it up with a lot of caveats, which is the way it should be treated right now. And
Well, or any other power in the region. I mean, there's speculation that Saudi Arabia did this to themselves as a way of, giving themselves an excuse to go into war with Iran. I'm skeptical of that too, but that's being kicked around. I think the easiest explanation is that the Houthis, who Saudi Arabia has been bombing the bejesus out of in Yemen, the Houthis got some fairly advanced equipment, presumably from Iran, and decided to use it. And they used it against Saudi Arabia, and they got lucky. But, how this plays out, I don't know. Bill, thanks for the call. Rob in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Rob, what's on your mind today?
Hello.
Hey, Rob.
Can you hear me?
I can. You're on the air.
One of the questions concerns, is Donald Trump the gatekeeper for Greenbrier? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I am not. What is Greenbrier?
Greenbrier was the Greenbrier Country Club was where they put the main base for Congress should there be a nuclear attack.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I have no idea.
If he has information concerning all of that, including the possibility of astronomical impacts on the Earth, which would do something of this nature, does he control who goes down there?
I don't know how that works. I know that there is a plan. I mean, in fact, there was a TV show based on it. There is a plan for if the United States is under attack, or if the Capitol is under attack. I think that they executed that plan after 9/11. You have your designated survivor, which was the TV show that was made out of that. But how that plan works and what role the president plays specifically in it, I can't tell you, Rob. I just off the top of my head, I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
He refused to do that to bomb Castro simply because of that.
There's a lot of situations there you could game out, and that's back to the show, the Designated Survivor show. It could get very dramatic, but I frankly I don't know. We'll be back. Stick around. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Members. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Vicki in Glendale, California. Hey, Vicki, what's up?
Hey, I just have a question as to whether or not you think this might be a possibility of a cyber attack. Could a major financial institution been hacked as part of all of this unrest in the Middle East and everywhere else in the world?
Boy, that's an interesting question. I would guess not, because there's a broad enough diversity of banks and financial institutions that participate in the repo market, that are lending and borrowing money back and forth to each other on an ongoing basis, that the risk of an individual bank getting hacked, bringing the system down, is probably fairly low. But conceivably the system being hacked, I don't know. The thing that spooks me is that the Fed dumped they created out of thin air $75 billion and threw it into the system last night. in order to get these interest rates down, which went all the way up to 10%. In other words, the banks were saying, we're so worried about you, Ralph, you Bank of America or whatever it may be, that you're going to have to pay us 10% in order to borrow, a couple $billion from us overnight. And if the amount of money that people were, that these banks were trying to borrow was $75 billion, I just don't know where that is in the spectrum, whether that's a lot or a little, but it's very concerning. Vicki, you raise an excellent question. Yeah. I think we'll find out as time goes on. Thanks for the call. Ed in Redlands, California. Hey, Ed, what's up? Ed, you're on the air. No, Ed. Let's try Sandy in Sedgwick, Colorado. Hey, Sandy, what's on your mind today?
Well, speaking of scary signs, where is the outcry of church separation of church and state? Now, as I see it, Trump is saying that he is the chosen one. And we're going into like the book of Revelation, and as they follow the chapters, here Bush sent 144,000 into a war into Iran or Iraq, and now it's going into the
Wait a minute, 144,000 is the number from Revelation of basically the way that it's being interpreted by Rush Dooney and all these other, well, he's dead, but these fundamentalist Christians these days, is that's the number of Jews who need to convert to Christianity or die in the end days kind of thing. It's pretty bizarre, but I don't know, Sandy. I really don't know, and it is a problem, though. This is a country that is supposed to have this wall of separation, to quote James Madison. Mick in Burton, Washington. Hey, Mick, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thank you for taking the call.
Sure.
I am interested in the conversation you had with Professor Wolff that possibly the reason for all this thing in the repos is due to the possibility that Brexit will affect the
but that
world
possibility
economy.
actually just went down in the last 3 days. I mean, you've got the European Union saying that they'll grant more time. You've got members of Parliament saying they're not going to allow a hard Brexit. Parliament voted on that, I believe. I think the risk of Brexit is actually lower now than it was.
Well, thank you for letting me know that. I was under the understanding that it's a rippling effect that Germany's quite concerned about.
Yeah, well, it may be that I'm misunderstanding it, Mick. We'll find out. Thank you for the call, Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I've been listening to you and Richard Wolff, and I really love Richard. Something that has occurred to me is right before this fluctuation in the interest and the money that you're talking about, $75 billion. Were you watching the commodities markets, the gold and silver markets last week by any chance?
No, but I did note that gold went up yesterday.
Well, now gold and silver, silver had a run. I have a little bit of silver, and I've been watching it. And it had been laying anywhere from down as far as 1480 or 1470 on up to 18. Well, then it took a run almost up to 20 last week. So I'm wondering if there wasn't short-term money speculated on gold and silver last week.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I'm wondering if the oil markets, because gold and silver tend to track the oil market also, which takes this all back to this attack on Saudi Arabia. But I just, Brandy, I don't know. And none of us know, and if Professor Wolff doesn't know, then I guess the important point that he made is the Fed needs to be fessing up. They need to be telling us what the hell's going on here. This may well be a very, very big deal. Anyhow, we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget democracy requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!